Good afternoon, Axel. My name is Aimée Mugisha. I'm working as an account manager for the Verhaert Group. And I'm sitting here with you, Axel Funhoff, the General Director of the Verhaert Group, former investment banker, but also finance professor at the Antwerp Management School. Thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
So what are we going to discuss today? We're going to have a deep dive in the macroeconomic picture of innovation within Europe, and then more specifically, the research and development innovation, since it affects us, our clients, and the innovation service sector as a whole. So I suggest let's dive in. The first question that everybody wants to know, what is, according to you, the next big thing in terms of innovation, meaning where will we live 5 to 10 years from now, or how will we live 5 to 10 years from now?
There are a number of important drivers that will probably shape the next 5 or 10 years. On the one hand, I think that we are entering a phase of very, very high productivity growth that is fueled by digitization and AI in particular. And that trend will enable certain applications that will come to the market over the next 5 to 10 years. I'm specifically talking about humanoid robots. I'm really convinced that humanoid robots will come to the market. Secondly, I would also think of self-driving cars. I think it's a question of couple of years really, before we have largely self-driving cars in the market. That will change a lot. I'm very, very optimistic about the use cases for humanoid robots, for example. I would maybe like to go a little bit deeper, maybe in the later sections of our conversation. But let me say that the key difference between the robots that we know so far and humanoid robots are that the robots that we know so far are extremely good about a very, very specific task, for example, welding or gluing. And they are very expensive in what they are doing. They are very expensive. So we are talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars per robot, which is then broadly applied in manufacturing industries such as automotive industry and so on. And you have a very, very good use case. You have a very good investment case to invest into the manufacturing chain for such very, very specific robots. Humanoid robots are very, very different. They are, like humans, relatively good at many, many different tasks. At the same time, they are relatively inexpensive. So, for example, right now, the bill of materials of a humanoid robot would be about $30,000, and that's expected to go down to $20,000. The rest is really software. So, in other words, humanoid robots can be very, very broadly applied for general tasks. They are extremely scalable because what they really need to learn, they really need to learn a certain task and then just copy the software to other humanoid robots. So will they work and support us in our daily household? I'm relatively sure they will. They will clean up, they will wash up, they will wash the car, they will cut the lawn, and so forth and so forth. So for those general tasks, also, by the way, in industrial use cases, in logistics, for example, smaller jobs, they can actually really do. In my view, humanoid robots are really sort of the ultimate hardware enabled use of software, because it's the software, the tasks that will generate the ultimate value. Think of humanoid robots in the construction side. We will hopefully be able to build houses a bit more complex again, with a bit more ornaments than we have done over the last 100 years. Thanks to that automation.
And if I may interrupt you, do you think that European regulations or labor unions will be ready for that type of implementation, mostly looking from an industrial point of view?
There will certainly be pushback, no doubt about it. I don't think that there's any legislation that would prohibit the use of humanoid robots. So I think that we will just continue the wave of productivity increases and automation as we have done in the past, but probably at an accelerated pace. That is really what I would expect. So I don't think that there's any legislation that would stop it. What is more concerning to me is that humanoid the market for humanoid robots is really developed by the Americans and the Chinese. I'm not aware of any larger company in Europe that actually does produce humanoid robots to an extent where we could industrialize it.
Yeah.
And that is, again, one of the subjects, and I'm sure that we can talk about that more in depth later on, but that's, again, one of the subjects where Europe has lost a certain technology leadership.
Yeah.
I also believe that Europeans are somewhat hesitant accepting that technology as a sort of day-to-day help, also in different industries, but also in household.
Yeah, but we'll dive deeper into that later, indeed, in regards to the cultural adoption of innovation between the US and Europe. Are there some other forms of visual things that you see that might be the next big thing in innovation?
Yeah, so if you think about, for example, driverless cars that come to the market, they're now being tested in the US and in China and so forth. And the question is, will driverless cars be sufficiently safe by just equipping them with cameras, or do we need radar systems and other sensors? Probably we need radar systems and other sensors to make them really safe. But think about it. Think about that you can drive extremely safely with a driverless car. That would completely require a complete redesign of the car as we know it right now. The car as we know it right now is a machine built around the driver for the pleasure of the driver, maybe for the pleasure of the guests, but very much focused around the engine and the active drive experience. A true driverless car will have a completely different setting, a completely different design. You may think of a lounge that is rolling. You may think of an office that is rolling. You may think of an entertainment saloon that is rolling. You may think of a sleeping car that is rolling. So basically, all the design from ambient lighting to the entertainment system inside is different. The engine doesn't really matter anymore.
No.
You don't have to have 300 horsepower or more for a driverless car. In fact, you want to be chauffeured slowly and safely. So the car industry of the future with driverless cars will enter a transition period of massively new designs. If you want me to speak about another innovation, next to humanoid robots and driverless cars, that will probably affect, probably the convenience of our living, I think that we are not very far away anymore from much more performant battery technologies, for example, solid-state batteries that are currently really being developed, and it's not yet there for mass industrial production. But those batteries will have more capacity, they will be safer, and they will enable a much more convenient electrification of, for example, the car industry. So that would be another one. And besides that, without going too deep into that, but the quantum computing that I do not really expect for the next 5 or 10 years, but if you combine the quantum computing of the future, 10 years plus or so, with the challenges in biomedical research and in genetic research, I think that we will still experience in our lifetimes very, very large breakthroughs and really understanding the human genomics patterns much better than we do so far. There will be a major breakthrough, but I think our daily life could well be changed by driverless cars or humanoid robots.
I'm very interested to see how that would go, having a nap in the car while driving to work. But maybe a question in regards to the solid-state batteries. Energy today is a big topic, the cost of energy. Even though the topic is not far developed yet, how do you think that companies today can prepare for this arrival of solid-state batteries?
I mean, the key difference between solid-state batteries and current lithium-ion batteries are that solid-state batteries have a larger capacity and you can charge them faster. So that means specifically a large implication for the power charging infrastructure for the electromobility. So in other words, we will probably need a rollout of more capacity to charge our cars. So our cars will not be charged anymore at a maximum of 200 kilowatt hours, which is already huge, but 300 or more. And we can probably in the future charge, say, 700 or 800 kilometers, maybe even 1,000 or more kilometers in 10 or 15 minutes. And of course, for that, you need a different infrastructure. We don't have that available at all at the moment. And that is probably the major implication of these solid-state batteries to come.
Interesting. So that would also mean a big impact on the EV market.
Yes.
In terms of the criticality in regards to the number of kilometers, the range would actually be solved by such type of innovations.
Absolutely, because then the reach will increase and the charging times will reduce. So basically the convenience will basically massively improve, and hence the acceptance rate for electric vehicles will increase. But also think of utility vehicles, including trucks and vans. And combine that with the idea of being driverless. That will, on the one hand, boost productivity dramatically, also protect the environment, of course, but at the same time, it will have also very big implications for the labor market. Because the key fear, of course, and I'm absolutely not the first one to bring that topic up, but the key fear, of course, is the next boost of productivity increases will be really much, much faster than the labor market can absorb people for new jobs. We will always create new jobs, as we have always done in history, but the next boost of industrial productivity increases could well lead to a disruption of really very, very rapid, very fast technology adaptation. And of course, we may see these implications, very, very likely to see these implications on the labor market.
Yeah, but it's interesting because you just introduced the first major trend of innovation that you see. You just named it, productivity.
Yes.
Are there other trends that you would identify coming up in this innovation cycle?
Well, there's one thing that is very, very important for the next cycle, and that is probably nearshoring, because we have seen through the geostrategic shifts over the last years that global supply chains are no longer safe and reliable. That has started through COVID, and then it has massively started through the war in Ukraine. And the world is just not as safe anymore as it was 5 years ago, and hence we Europeans, we absolutely need to rethink from where we source critical components. Asia may no longer be that reliable as we may have thought. America is certainly not that reliable anymore. Basically, we are being threatened with tariffs every now and then, every week, and then not. But essentially, the conclusion is that it's not reliable anymore. So we need to really think about nearshoring component procurement. Very important next trend to have on the radar if you're an innovation executive.
Yeah. And how does that nearshoring translate to product innovation for companies?
I think it's a very important implication that we really need to rethink from where we source our critical components, what stock levels we keep, and also I think that there is tremendous opportunity for European companies to set up own production, for example, of semiconductors. That has an implication for automation, because we basically need to have, just as Asia and as America, we just need to have state-of-the-art semiconductor foundries here in Europe. You may have seen that in the last 12 months or so, Germany basically bought Intel's investment in Germany with a 10 or so billion euro subsidy. That is one part of the solution. That's not a structural solution. I think the structural solution really is that Europe has its own semiconductor manufacturing capacity in Europe and basically be able to source critical components from Europe itself.
And do you believe we have the talent, the resource capabilities here in Europe to also provide that demand?
I think we have. I mean, there are certain locations in Europe, certain regions in Europe, where you have plenty of such semiconductor industry. A little bit is even in Belgium. But if you look, for example, in Germany, around the area of Dresden, there's Infineon, there will be there will be Intel in the future, hopefully, and so forth. So yes, there are regions where you can source those people. Paris is similar, and so forth. Yes, so I guess we can ramp up capacities there relatively quickly. Okay. Now we're not talking about investing and having a capacity tomorrow. It's a question of several years, of course, to really ramp up that capacity. We're talking more 3 years, 5 years, 6 years, something like that. But I think it's important to start planning that capacity.
Okay, interesting. So I understand there's a productivity as a major trend, nearshoring. Any other major trends that you could identify?
Now, obviously, basically all the sectors are somewhat affected by AI. We also see that the defense industry will have to be completely need to be rethought. We see in the Ukraine war that traditional defense systems are of limited use. I'm not saying that they are not of use. They are still of use, but the decisive factors probably are more automated drone systems and so on. We see from China every now and then how advanced you can go with drones in the air and on the ground. I guess that is really another sector that will face enormous innovation in the future.
Okay. All right. No, thank you. So now that we have a better idea at where we see innovation going to, where do you think we stand today in the innovation cycle of 2025?
I think that we are in the early innings of recovery. That is really also what we can see in our sector. So we have had a bit of a cyclical downturn behind us, like the whole sector. What has happened is that corporates, so larger companies, really went risk off. They didn't free as much money anymore for experimental R&D. And at the same time, what we also see is that the funding for startups has declined by about 40 to 50% since the peak in 2001. So that means that the startup hype that we have seen in the past, that is over. Startups now have to be smarter, more to the point, more relevant. And so there are just simply less highly funded startups in the market as formerly. But what we see clearly is a stabilization. By the way, you see this also in terms of the business sentiment. The business sentiment is improving. Very recently, the IFO Institute in Germany released new data, and basically business executives now estimate the chance of an economic expansion to be nearly 100%, and that comes from nearly 0%, 12 or 18 months ago. We can also see some movement in the early cycle sectors. So, for example, a stabilization to a slight improvement in shipping volumes. So these would be the early cyclical sectors that would already show that there is stabilization to minimum momentum improvement. If you combine that with the policy decisions that have been taken most recently in the European Union, but also in Germany, then it is very clear that from governmental institutions we can really expect massive investments in the hundreds of billions of euros. And of course that will potentially initiate a new investment cycle. We still need to get some legislation out of the way in Germany to make clear to companies what the investment conditions now are in terms of, for example, tax deductibility and so forth. Once that is behind us, I do expect the cycle to start and to grow into 2026. Okay. So basically 2026 is going to be better than 2025. That was already better than 2024. We're talking low momentum, but that is really what we can see at the moment.
And I'm very intrigued by the end of the startup hype that you just mentioned. it's kind of contradictory to the investment that's going back up again. Do you think that big corporations will have to take over that role of the startups, for example, through ventures or spin-offs of big corporations? Will they have to take over those startup roles?
I think that in the last, if I may call it startup hype, the last very, very big ramp up of startups and new businesses and so on, another idea was also en vogue, and that was the idea of corporate venturing. So that corporates would take a minority stake, typically in a startup, and boost it really to a certain strength, and then potentially take it over and incorporate the innovation of that startup. What we can see that is that this model has really failed in many, many sectors.
Okay.
It is in the biotech and pharma sector, it has worked, and it has traditionally worked. So biotech companies typically ramp up to a level of market readiness, and then they get taken over by big pharma, and big pharma rolls out a certain a patent for a certain medicine globally, and that works very, very well. But for example, it does work much less so in the construction industry. It works much less so in the technology industry or in the home appliance industry. It really has its hiccups. And so I really believe that we are just in classical cyclical businesses. So basically the cycle also for startups will pick up again eventually. But don't forget that by far most of the resources in R&D are spent by very, very large corporations. That is not going to change.
Okay.
If you take a bigger industrial group, a classical industrial group with, say, 100 billion revenues, there are not that many of those businesses, but 100 billion in revenues would typically translate into, say, 8 or so billion in R&D costs. There is really the big money in R&D, and even that follows cycles, of course.
Yeah. Okay. No, very interesting. Thank you. There are a lot of things changing geopolitically, economically. Do you think that the next cycle will be quite familiar to what we've already known, or are we really entering a new era of innovation with fundamental differences?
I believe that the next cycle will be different from past cycles because the world has changed. The world is less safe than we perceived it to be in the last cycle. So I really do believe that the geostrategic shifts that we are seeing in Ukraine, Russia, in the Middle East, possibly in the Far East. We never know when and whether and when there may be a conflict between China and Taiwan. But basically people have that on their radar. So I do believe really that those shifts in the geostrategic situation will also have a major implication for the next innovation cycle. And hence I get back to my topic of nearshoring. I think it's really important that we do not rely on the further trend of globalization. I think that the trend of globalization is currently somewhat broken. We don't enter a phase into accelerated globalization. I think that we enter a phase of decelerated, potentially even declining globalization. And that really means that there will be protectionism much, much more than the last cycle, initiated by these trade wars that are hitting us at the moment, that are sometimes on, sometimes off. But basically, the unreliability of supply chains are a major factor. So that one will change, and the next innovation cycle will have. Will spend much more resources on defense technology than the past innovation cycle, and let's not forget, if we just completely shift away from politics and the geopolitical situation, let's not forget that artificial intelligence and the deployment of artificial intelligence and therefore the increasing level of digitization, that really will also determine and decide the next cycle. So we are talking about products that are much more hybrid, that are much more digitized than in the past, where data become much more relevant in terms of not just understanding data, but really validating data, valorizing data, and hence again, I think that it's really important to to embrace those new technologies and to really move forward with the help of these cutting-edge technologies.
Yeah. And you know, AI is a term that everyone is throwing around like flower petals. What do you think, which industry or which sector could today really use AI as a competitive edge or get a step ahead in the race of innovation?
Very good question, because indeed there has been a bit of a hype as well around AI. And what you can see, and it is absolutely not a surprise, those sectors that possess very, very large amounts of data were the first sectors to utilize AI very successfully, such as insurances, banks, e-commerce, media, online media, and so forth. They were the first ones to embrace AI and had success with it. It was much harder to introduce AI technology into anything that was hardware driven. You even see that with our clients, that they and together, we help them to find use cases for hardware-driven AI. So you need to install sensors, relevant sensors. You need to connect and measure data. You need to find data patterns. That has to have a certain value, for example, for predictive maintenance. But basically, hardware-enabled AI is much more difficult to deploy. And hence, these very, very fundamental transformational innovations such as humanoid robots, self-driving cars. That is really the hardware-enabled AI where we are going to see a big difference over the next 5 years, a massive difference.
So for you, servitization is something to really keep an eye on, and that could also be included in one of the next big things to look out for.
Yes, and so, for example, if you think through the right business model of a humanoid robot. I mean, you will not buy a humanoid robot for $20,000 or $30,000 to then start from scratch. So the humanoid robot will have to learn from you how you iron your shirts, for example. No, it will be pre-programmed to do that, and probably you will have to pay for these different tasks that it can do. So washing dishes will be a different packages from cleaning laundry and ironing shirts and doing the hedges in the garden. I mean, basically, these will be the little add-ons for which you really pay. So basically, the business model of a humanoid robot will end up to be a largely software-based business model with lots of modules that you will have to pay for. And so eventually, obviously we're far away from that, but eventually the production of a humanoid robot will be a commodity. I mean, then we're talking really 10 years plus probably, and the fine-tuning will all be the software. You know, the way how well such robots master actually certain tasks.
Okay, interesting. Do you also see it in our pool of clients, the demand increasing of how will we attach a software to our hardware? How will we servitize our product?
Yes, we see that trend undoubtedly, and we also see that products also of our clients become ever more integrated and hybrid, and we see much more business that affects 2 or 3 of our business divisions. The classical one would be a product, a hybrid product that would affect our product innovation division together with our digital innovation division. So yes, hybrid products, physical products with a lot of connectivity, with tools in them, with a whole digital architecture behind, with elements that solve issues around data integrity, data reliability, data security, but also data validation, artificial intelligence, and so forth. Yeah, much more. I still would wish that it would go even further, because obviously you still see a lot of traditional approach to the market. So companies that have been very successful with traditional hardware-only products, for example, we're happy to help, of course, but I think that it's worth a lot also for our clients to think a little bit further. So what could be the value add for users and also for them if they, for example, digitize their user interface. What's very, very interesting in my view is that we, and many of us, maybe even by now most of us, have smartwatches. I have never seen two smartwatches to look exactly the same. So the user always has the preference to customize something according to his or her preferences. The same is true in modern cars with dashboards, LED screen dashboards.
Yes.
I've never seen exactly the same
That's
dashboard
true.
twice. So that customization is really something that users prefer. And of course, by having a digital interface or a digital app, you also know the user. You know who that person is. You can directly channel your marketing channels to that user. You know the user behavior much, much better than through user surveys and so forth. So I really think that it's absolutely worth rethinking classical, traditional hardware-only product and make them hybrid. There's a lot of gain both for the user and for the company itself.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. No, but thank you for that further insight. And if we go back a bit in the past, how would you say that historically there has been a structural shift in that race of innovation? We spoke of it recently, how China was a big empire, the lead in innovation and advantage. How do you see history playing in that race of innovation between US, Europe, and even China?
I really believe that we have three different models that compete against each other. You have, on the one hand, a very liberal capitalist model that you have in the US. The European model, on the other hand, is not so freely capitalist. The Europeans tend to step in very fast with regulation. On the other hand, the Europeans also try to steer innovation earlier with subsidization, much, much different from the US. In the US, the innovation is really largely market-based and enterprise-based, market-driven and driven by entrepreneurs, more than in Europe. China, on the other hand, is again a very, very different model. In fact, China, if you look at the history of China, basically over millennials, China has been the center of the universe. Only around 1500 or so, there was a disconnection in the development where China lost against the West. And China had a very, very troubled, say, 150 years. And it's very, very clear that China now, the modern China, let's say from Deng Xiaoping onwards, really wants to put itself back on the map as a powerhouse economically and technologically and so forth. China did an enormous had enormous progress to really catch up technologically against us. Nobody has ever been faster in history than China. In 30 years, really, you would not recognize if you visit China now, and if you had visited it 30 years ago, you would not think that it's the same country. And now China is technologically in many, many leadership roles. Whether it's AI or quantum computing, probably the China together with the US are leading the pack. It's difficult to say who leads in what niche and so on. I would say that in modern defense technology, China has a leadership role over the US. And I would say that China probably was driven to reinvent itself and to become completely independent again and to take up its leadership role again, which it was used to, at least in its own perception traditionally, to really escape its century of humiliation, which it had between, say, 1840, the First Opium War, and the Second World War. That was really the century of humiliation that China perceived, and afterwards the progress was absolutely rapid. Very, very interesting. So Europe is really the continent with most complacency, very much dependent on government intervention, government decisions, government subsidization programs, very much dependent on regulation, because Europe tends to regulate very, very early. I remember in the 80s, we had very, very early stage regulation on the biotech sector already in Europe, certainly in Germany. Now Europe took the leadership role in regulating AI. So if you're an AI entrepreneur and you really have a great idea of a very, very scalable model, why, if you are completely neutral, would you stay in Europe? Why wouldn't you go to the US? The US has its own issues, certainly now with its current administration, but the US has another major advantage over Europe, and that is much, much deeper capital markets, much, much more integrated capital markets. Europe is trying to implement a capital markets union since 10 years. It hasn't worked until today. Europe still has 27 different financial markets regulations. And so it's much, much more difficult in Europe to scale so massively as European scale, as American scale-ups and unicorns have really presented and demonstrated over the past, say, 10 or 20 years. Impossible to think of that in Europe. And we really need to enable that in Europe in order to really enable big-scale innovation.
Yeah, because you just mentioned it, technological sectors such as AI, the US is taking the lead. Do you think it's even possible for Europe to gain back that lead, especially in those critical sectors? Is there a possibility to catch up again?
I think it. Yes, I think it is. I think that much of it has to do with attitude as well. So I believe that Europe has been happy and willing to be relatively dependent on others. And Europe was really of the belief that shared labor across the globe is the best model. And of course, it's then the best model if everybody sticks to the rules. If one important stakeholder starts to break the rules and, for example, starts to impose tariffs out of the blue, then this model is broken and we can no longer rely on shared labor on a global scale. So Europe is certainly doing a lot to catch up in AI. I mean, nothing close to the dimensions of the US, but I think that Europe has really understood that it needs its own AI sector. Secondly, Europe has, of course, also understood that it needs its own space sector and its own space telecommunication sector. So Europe needs its own sort of own Starlink. That is understood. And we need to, we really need to get our act together. We need to step up our investment and probably also allow the private sector to scale faster than what is possible at the moment.
Yeah, because you also explained to me why it's important that Europe takes back that position. Could you maybe further highlight why it might be important to have our own communication technology in regards to space?
Yeah, I mean, that particular question would be even security related because we cannot afford to be dependent on a country that may overnight decide otherwise. So, for example, in the last couple of days, the Trump administration has decided not to deliver critical weapons anymore to Ukraine. I mean, that is something that we cannot risk ever. So we need to, for own security purposes, we need to have our own systems. But if you look at the difference in wealth development, in pure wealth development between the US and Europe over the past 15 years, that's already enough. 15 years ago, say a country like Germany or Belgium was pretty much equally rich as America on a per capita basis. Nowadays, the US is 55% richer on a per capita basis than Belgium or Germany. And the reason is that on the one hand, they are a bit more than 20% more productive. So they generate a bit more than 20% more GDP per worked hour. On the other hand, they also work more hours. So the US has really boosted ahead, and they have not boosted ahead because the Walmarts of this world generate more wealth than the Aldis of this world. That is not the reason. The reason is that they have really pushed ahead in very, very critical sectors, such as AI, such as the general digital sector, in biotech, in finance, in financial technology, in space and defense, in microelectronics and semiconductors. Those are really the sectors where the US has made a major difference. Think of all these multi-trillion-dollar companies. with one exception, that is Saudi Aramco, they're all American. And that's the Apples of this world, the Microsofts of this world, the Nvidias of this world, and so forth, the Google and the Meta and so forth. And that is exactly where Europe really has nothing to offer. The most valuable company in Europe is SAP with 300 plus billion. ASML is another one, 300 plus billion. Yeah, that's a tenth of the most valuable companies in the US. So really, it's for the wealth creation and the security that we really do not want to be too dependent on others. We are not used to that, to be so dependent. In fact, we are used to really out-innovate the Americans to a very large extent. And I think that the inflection point was probably around 1990, where Europe and Japan, 1989 or so, when Germany and Japan and Switzerland and Sweden and so on were really the top leaders in innovation, and America was seen as a relatively old, country with old technology. The large sectors, car industry and so on, were absolutely not up to scratch, were not up to the level that Japan delivered, for example, or Sweden or Germany. And then the US started to introduce a technology sector, which they have systematically expanded beyond our capabilities in Europe. That's very interesting. There's one other factor which I may want to highlight just as one of the underlying structural wealth drivers of the US. If you look at Europe's dependency on energy, we need to import about 1.5 to 2% of our GDP from the Middle East or from wherever energy comes. The US is completely energy independent, so that means that if they spend the same money on energy, it doesn't leave their country. It's spent in their country. So there's a 2%, nearly 2%. Structural boost due to the energy independence, which we cannot copy. No. We can copy innovation. We can hopefully boost ahead in innovation and really take a push into the next innovation cycle. And I really hope that we catch up with the top leaders of this world.
Yeah, and if you put those three mindsets next to each other, what should, according to you, be the first exercise that European leadership in companies should be doing right now to gain back that competitive edge?
I mean, there are basically two directions you can work towards in parallel. There's, on the one hand, the regulator. I don't feel that we can really change politics so much. But I would very, very much welcome a capital markets union in the European Union. I would very much also welcome a legislation that would allow private pension funds, so private pension savings, so to basically completely overhaul our pension system. Why? Because that would put aside substantial amounts of money for the future. 20 years out, 30 years out, more out. And so that money would be available for new ventures, and it would really deepen the financial market as we see in America. So much of that capital that is being invested in private equity or venture capital really comes from pension funds or university endowments or something like that. So that is really money that Europe does not have available in that quantity. But the Capital Markets Union, so having basically one legislation for all European capital markets, that seems to be the most low-hanging fruit. Having said that, again, Europe is working on that since 10 years. Besides that is the private sector. And I think that the private sector in Europe should really step up their game in the sense that they have to understand that they can really leapfrog ahead of others if they make more money available for R&D, if they dare to really embrace new technologies, if they really also dare to develop something that may not work out. So I think that the risk aversion in Europe with respect to innovation and with respect to imagining a better, more advanced world, that risk aversion should get reduced. And I really, really hope that European companies, by and large, really embrace the chance to really boost ahead and really embrace these new productivity-enhancing technologies.
Yeah. So to close off our conversation, Axel, which advice would you give our clients to further boost their innovation capabilities?
Yeah, I think it's important to really think big into the next cycle, to absolutely understand that we in Europe have really lost our number one space. Others are better than we are. America is much better than we are. China is also better than we are. What you see in Europe is that the R&D euros that we spend does not get translated into productivity increases as much as in China or the US. So we spend about 500 billion euros every year on corporate R&D, but the 700 billion that China spends, or the 800 billion that America spends, translates into more productivity growth than the 500 billion in Europe. That's a concern. So we really have to embrace productivity-enhancing technologies, and preferably out of the private sector without being dependent on subsidies, and certainly not waiting for subsidies. I think that really has to come out of intrinsic motivation from corporates. So I would really also say that, and you can motivate this perfectly by looking at valuation differences in companies between the US and Europe. I would say that growth is rewarded much more than, for example, dividends and payouts, and hence let's go for growth again through a bigger cycle of R&D spending. So my advice would also really be to dare to experiment with new technologies and dare to go all in, not to experiment a bit and then withdraw. We all know how difficult it is. We really know how difficult it is to find relevant use cases with little amounts of money and experimentation. It's really important to go in terms of transformational innovation. And I come back to my humanoid robot. That is really a game changer. That's really a game changer into the next economic cycle. I would really love Europeans to embrace that as well. More in general, of course, the way of thinking in terms of product upgrades, next generation product and so on, is not the right thinking when you want to embrace products as hybrid products, so physical and digital together. Then you really have to think in terms of product platform. So establish a product platform where you can really build a whole product family, which you do not have to change all the time, from where you can really develop products that all work on the same platform. That's a really important one. And then very, very important, and that is critical, and also critical in terms of supply chain integrity, supply chain security, and hence staying in business. That is to really embrace the idea of nearshoring of component procurement here in Europe, of setting up production facilities for critical components in Europe. And that is, of course, maybe not just pure private sector. That may be also something that needs to be facilitated or boosted by public institutions, but it's important to really set up our own production capacities. And of course, this will only be productive and profitable if it's extremely automated. So we need to think and rethink the level of automation that really want to have in our factories into the next cycle.
The advice that you're giving, theoretically very nice, but it's long-term investment. It's requiring investment capital that will not show short-term returns. So how would you advise our clients to help them build a case to indeed vouch for long-term R&D investment, even though you will not see any short-term results?
You're right. You're completely right. It's absolutely not easy. So I think that if you can show that your R&D spending really translates into top-line growth, that means that your products or your services, your value proposition is being validated on a broader basis in the market. The markets wants more of you. If you can show that, then the market will reward that in terms of higher valuations. It's exactly what we have seen in the US. Companies there have shown stronger growth rates, and maybe also more mature companies have also shown a higher margin. But it's the growth rate and then the profitability, of course, that really makes the valuation. And I think that Europeans have been somewhat complacent about being happy with a moderate growth rates, while American companies to a very large extent have outgrown them. And so I would really, really invest in future growth. And there's a second, more societal implication of this as well. I guess that the key question, of course, is, we in our age, we have sort of grown up in a world that was, by our self-perception, the number one. Europe was the most sophisticated, the most innovative, the most educated, and so forth. And that's just no longer the case anymore. And the key question, of course, is which world do we want to build for the next generation? And I really think that we have to catch up again. We have to invest into those sectors again that will guarantee our welfare in the future, also for the sake of our children.
And I love that you're bringing, the idea of innovation from a very institutional-based, corporate-based to actually what it really matters about. It's the welfare that we want to provide for the next generations. So thank you very much. I think I would like to close off here, if that's fine for you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time and your very interesting insights. And I'm sure we'll sit down together soon to have some more of these discussions. Thank you, Axel.
Thank you, Aimée.